Hello, welcome to the ESRC Festival of Social Science. My name is James Brown. I work at the Warwick Institute of Engagement, and it's my pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. Today's event is all about city and town twinning, about different cities and towns across the world. So it's really important that we hear from you. We want to hear your comments, your thoughts, and your questions. If you're on YouTube, you should see the chat box down the side of your screen. Do please put your questions in there, but also let us know where you're coming from. This is all about different towns and cities across the world, so let us know where you're joining us from. If you're watching this through the Eventbrite link, you might need to click on the YouTube video to take you to the YouTube page so that you can see that chat box. Please do use it. We do want to hear from you. There'll be plenty of time at the end of the session to answer questions, so please do put those in as we go along. There are loads of different events happening as part of the festival. There's still more today and tomorrow. You can find all the Warwick ones at warwick.ac.uk/ESRCFOSS, the Festival of Social Science. So you can register for those there, and you can also see the full programme from all the other universities too. If you're on Twitter, we're at Warwick Engages, so you can follow us and continue the conversation there. And we're using the hashtag ESRC Festival as well. So please do tweet and use that hashtag if you're on Twitter. I think that's probably enough from me. It's a real pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, which is Dr. Michael Hammond. He's at the Warwick Education Studies Centre for Education Studies. So I'll pass over to Michael, and he will take it from here.
Hello, and good to see, or at least sense, everybody today. We are Michael Hammond and Nicole Berrios Ortega, and we've been working on a project. Hello, Nicole. We've been working on a project around twinning, in particular Coventry and city twinning. Before we go any further, we'd like to acknowledge the help of the Coventry Association for International Friendship and others as well, local teachers, for telling us about twinning, and more so for continuing to keep international links alive.
Can we have our slides, James, please? Thank you. So the presentation today is called Seeing Through Other Eyes, the Enduring Value of Town and City Twinning. And before we get started, we'd like to gauge some of your ideas about twinning. So I'm going to ask all of you who are there to scan this QR code and type in your ideas of twinning. If you cannot scan the code, can you please go to this link over there and type in your ideas about twinning. We will be sharing these ideas on the screen, but also we will like to think of these ideas that you have and think about them throughout the presentation. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to go there. And if, James, you could share the answer guidance, that'd be great. Going to start seeing what people think about this. James, if you could refresh, please, to see if there are any answers. Nothing yet. Okay. So we have some ideas here. Visiting new friends, school trips, yes. Good. James, if we could share the QR code again. I think people didn't have time to scan the code. There you go, in case you didn't have time for that. But I guess lots of ideas were coming up in the word cloud. So can we go back to to these ideas. Okay, so we have key themes here: meeting new people, cultural exchange, visiting friends, visiting new friends, school trips, connecting, intercultural share, building relationships. Good. All right. All these are key themes to what we're going to be sharing with you today. So we would like you to keep those in mind as we go through the presentation. And please do use the chat to put your questions or any comments that you have throughout the presentations. We will try to address them at the end of this talk. Can we go back to the slides, please? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. So what we're going to do is to tell you some stories about twinning. And we begin. That's excellent. We begin, we want to talk about Coventry, and we begin with the Cross of Nails. As it happens, we are nearly at an anniversary. Coventry was bombed on the 14th of November, 1940. And this was the first time people in Britain took in the reality of the Blitz, and a time when a new word entered the German language, Coventryeden, meaning to bombard or lay waste to a city. Famously, on the following day, the cathedral provost, Dick Howard, chalked the message in the bombed-out ruins of the medieval cathedral, "Father, forgive," meaning that all people are in need of God's forgiveness, not just the enemy. 3 of the medieval roof nails that were found in the rubble were bound together to form a cross of nails. Today, Coventry Cathedral Cross of Nails community links many organisations worldwide which are committed to peace and reconciliation. Richard Howard's story is an interesting one, as he was very much concerned with German reconstruction after the war, and promoted Coventry's twinning with Kiel, a city in northern Germany, in 1947.
As you have seen, stories of peace and reconciliation have been told through works of art or artifacts. One example of these is this tablecloth, the Coventry and Stalingrad tablecloth. The link between Coventry and Stalingrad started when women of Coventry sent a message of support to the women in Stalingrad after the devastating German invasion, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. Although the message referred to the Soviet Union suffering generally, Stalingrad was chosen because of its similarity to Coventry in terms of its size and its industrial character. Message of support continued to be sent between the two cities. And in 1942, Stalingrad was facing annihilation in the worst battle of the Second World War, the Battle of Stalingrad. So women in Coventry made remarkable efforts to send aid. Emily Smith, Coventry's mayor at that time, and 830 other Coventry women signed their names onto a tablecloth, which was later sent with a message of sympathy to the women of Stalingrad. People contributed 6 pence to sign their names, and the money was also collected. There was money that was also collected in factories and other organizations. This money was sent to Stalingrad to support the hospitals with medical supplies. The names were later embroidered in the tablecloths by Mrs. May Adams over the course of the next 2 years. And although the bond of friendship was established in 1944, the tablecloth was handed over in 1947. You can now find it at the Panorama Museum in Volgograd, which is now called, which is now the name for Stalingrad. And this bond of friendship is often taken as the first example of city twinning, though the official twinning came several years later. So Coventry to this day has very close links with Volgograd. Another example of these works of art is the Stalingrad Madonna. This drawing that you can see here was made by Lieutenant Kurt Räuber, a German staff physician and who was also a Protestant pastor, in December 1942 during the Battle of Stalingrad. Räuber invited some surviving soldiers to celebrate Christmas, the birth of Jesus. And to enliven this cold, bleak dugout where they gathered, he drew a Russian mother and her child as a reflection of his love for Russian people who had been so cruelly treated by the Germans. This drawing came to be called the Stalingrad Madonna. And the Madonna, as you can see, is surrounded by these words in German: Licht, Leben, Liebe, Weihnachten, and the year 1942, which is light, love, and life, and Christmas in 1942. After the Russian victory, Räuber and many other surviving soldiers were imprisoned. However, the drawing became a significant icon in post-war German church life. It found its place at the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, a ruin preserved just as in Coventry, with a significant modern church beside it, which became West Berlin's cathedral. A replica of this Madonna was later presented to Coventry Cathedral. It forms part of the altarpiece at the cathedral's new chapel, and it was dedicated on the 50th anniversary of the Blitz by bishops of Coventry and Berlin and the Archbishop of Volgograd. Anglican, Lutheran, and Russian Orthodox, a truly international and ecumenical reunion, and a profound symbol of love in the midst of hatred.
This next picture is a newspaper cutting in 1957. The main article in this cutting is about twinning, but the photo is of something else. We read many articles in the online archives of the Coventry Evening Telegraph, and many were about visits of different people and groups to and from Coventry. But fair to say, there was quite an emphasis on visits from Lord Mayors and other dignitaries, though all the articles stress that the costs were kept to the minimum and any partners of dignitaries paid their own way. This article was about a visit to Warsaw, and this is typical of twinning at the time in two senses. First, twinning often meant in-person visits, which, although time-consuming, were possible as twin cities were mostly in Europe. And second, many of these twin cities were in Eastern Europe and at a time of Cold War. And it was an important aspect of the twinning work for the Labour Council to develop and maintain links with countries and cities in Eastern Europe at this time. This next picture, it's not very clear, but it's from the archive, from the Royal Institute of British Architects online archive, and it was taken in 1958. This was the year the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry was opened. Why this name? Well, Marshal Tito, or more correctly, the city of Belgrade, had donated £12,000 worth of timber, about £500,000 today, to the city, which they used for the reconstruction of the theatre. Harry Weston tells a story here. Harry was a local industrialist, Conservative Party member and city councillor, and became Lord Mayor for a year. He described in his autobiography how he felt it would be fitting to respond to this donation of the timber by offering a locally made motor car, a Humber Pullman. He and a small party duly arrived in Belgrade with the car, and the reception was very warm from all they met. However, he was later to find that, in his own words, although various organisations in Coventry had offered to pay for the car outright, they just did not want to know when I wrote to them again for a contribution so that it could be a gift from all sections of the community. And he ended up paying for half the cost of the car himself. The story tells a lot about Harry, but it also tells us something about the bipartisan support for twinning in Coventry.
In this project, we had the chance to interview people who took part in exchange programs with twin cities. I'm going to tell you two stories about two people who the presentation of a pantomime in the visited cities. The first trip she went on was to Kiel in Germany. And it took place when she was very, very young. She says about this, I was only 11, so I was quite young back then. And actually, that was the first time I had been abroad. It was quite scary, but I loved the show and I really wanted to do it. It involved a 4-day coach trip to Germany. It was a very long trip, and I remember I was very sick. As she didn't speak the language, in the German language, of course, she relied on gestures and body language, and she managed to communicate successfully with her host family. 3 years later, she took part on a second trip, exchange trip, to Volgograd this time. About this, she says, it was amazing. It was out of this world. I was 14 then, so I remember more about this trip. I remember I nearly couldn't go because of the cost, but I was the lead of the show and I had to make it happen. I used to sing in the clubs then, so we ended up doing a whip round to raise funds. She mentioned that there were around 50 people in this trip. They drove from Coventry to the airport and then they flew all the way to Moscow. They stayed a couple of days there and then to Volgograd a few days later. This was also Katie's first time on a plane. She mentions she remembers the people in Volgograd. And at the end of the show, they were all holding hands thinking, we shall overcome. And there was so much love in the room. She says that all the Russian people they met there were wonderful. The second story I'm going to tell you about is about Reese, a school teacher from Coventry, who told us about his twinning experiences, both as a student and later as a teacher. He says, when I was at Cardinal Newman in Coventry, I was fortunate to go on an exchange to Jinan in China. I think it was part of the Chamber of Commerce initiative to encouraging links with Coventry and Jinan. This trip, he says, was intended for 6 formers. They had to go through an application process with interviews, and in the end, 16 students from different schools were selected. It was a 10-day trip. They stayed in hotels and university accommodation, and every day they went to schools and visited students' families and did all kinds of different things. They also had the chance to meet with people from Coventry in this experience. As a teacher, as his experience as a teacher, he said, I wanted to take part in exchanges, although this wasn't in the forefront of my mind when I started teaching. But with Coventry being known as the city of peace and reconciliation, I felt there was a purpose for twinning and making these links. So it was a straightforward thing for me to do because I had already had the enthusiasm from my trip to Jinan years later. So they hosted a group of students from Dresden, and later they were invited as a school to visit Dresden the next year. About this idea of exchanging and twinning, he says, the whole idea of the exchange is to highlight to students that there are other people out there who can broaden your horizons. And students, we took the students we took, all came from different ethnic groups, ages, and they shared so much with young people in Dresden. So twinning makes you become aware of the world around you.
So twinning is kept alive through visits. For example, visits of professional groups, business groups, sports clubs, faith groups, or as in this example, cultural groups. This is a concert in celebration of the link with Volgograd and combines Volgograd Children's Symphony Orchestra with members of the Coventry Youth Wind Orchestra conducted by Yuri Ilyanov. The work has been created with Derek Nesbitt and writer Peter Kahn from the local arts organisation Talking Birds. Excellent, thank you. And if we move on to another musical arrangement, this time a Polish choir based solely in Coventry. Joanna, conductor of the choir, told us that they get asked to sing at events, not just Polish community events, but people just interested in choirs and wanting to hear folk songs from different countries. Joanna explained to us that usually we sing in Polish and English, half and half, but sometimes we sing in other languages too. We've had some English singers and singers from other countries in the choir. They are very welcome, but it is a challenge as we tend to use Polish a lot in rehearsals, and some of the Polish songs are difficult if you cannot follow the meaning. There are other stories of nurturing community identity and reaching out, told by people from the West Indies, Romania, and the large East Asian community in Coventry. Thank you.
One of the most active links we have is with Dresden. For example, the Coventry Dresden Arts Exchange. It was set up by two artists, John Yeadon from Coventry and Jean Kirsten in Dresden. The idea was to promote art-based partnerships between the two cities through dialogue, collaboration, and exchange between artists, curators, art historians, and audiences in both cities. This example is a bottom-up group link that the initial drive for collaboration came from two individuals in the two cities finding that they had something in common. Since 2012, this art exchange has had 8 collaborative exhibitions with Dresden, and they have done it in both cities. And the poster that you can see here is from one of the last ones, which is called Condition Humane from 2019, which was held in Coventry.
Of course, people in Coventry develop links with many cities around the world with which we are not officially twinned. This photo shows local children on a visit to Tokyo. Rebecca Bolans in Howes Community Primary School told us of her involvement with this visit in the lead up to what was going to be the Olympic Games in Tokyo. She said, when it got to Rio, things didn't happen very effectively. So straight after Rio, I got in touch with the Japan Foundation so that we could have a program in place and a 4-year build-up to Tokyo 2020. We worked on conferences with children, and we did a lot of work around the idea of Tokyo, the games, and doing sport. And as a part of that, we all thought it would be very useful for children to go to Japan and see some of the venues, learn about the sports, learn about Olympic values by working with children in Japan. So we arranged for 10 children from 5 different primary schools to go there. We were 17 people in total, along with teachers. Students were ambassadors, and they had to talk about their schools and give a presentation about Coventry and the city of culture. The children brought back information to share with their schools.
So as you can see, throughout this project, we have been able to see how twinning broadens people's horizons, creating enduring links between people and places, even when national politics become fractured. So we wanted to express what we learned from this project through art form, and we worked in collaboration with our partner Gemma Foy from Let's Animate, as part of Coventry Creates as well, and this video was created.
Did you know that Coventry is twinned with 26 cities around the world? Coventry, a city of peace and reconciliation, is a pioneer of twinning. It all began during the Second World War. The city of Stalingrad, which is now called Volgograd, had been destroyed during a siege by the German army. Women in Coventry donated 6 pence to sign their names on a tablecloth to raise money for medical provisions for the people of Stalingrad. You can now view this famous tablecloth in the Panoramic Museum in Volgograd. After the Second World War, Coventry twinned with other cities that had been destroyed, Warsaw, Dresden, and Kiel, but to name a few. Over the years, Coventry has twinned with its namesake, Coventry in Connecticut, USA, and Coventry, Rhode Island. And Coventry's West Indian community chose to be twinned with Kingston in Jamaica. To celebrate these twinnings, cities often built monuments, artworks, and renamed places. Coventry has Volgograd Place in the city centre and the Madonna of Stalingrad in the cathedral. In Dresden, there is a Coventry Strasse, and in Parks, Australia, a Coventry Library. So what happens when you are twinned? Sometimes there are official visits, but the focus is much more on grassroots exchanges between voluntary groups such as artists, musicians, theatre groups, as well as faith groups, business organisations and schools. Coventry students exchange visits with students from all over the world. Places like Jinan, China, Dresden, Kiel in Germany, and Volgograd in Russia, visiting their schools and homes. It is through these exchanges students learn how other young people live and how growing up in these places is similar but also different from Coventry. Of course, nowadays you don't have to visit face to face. You can carry out exchanges using social media. Does twinning matter? Twinning broadens people's horizons, creating enduring links between people and places, even when national politics becomes fractured. But you don't need to travel to understand twinning. Coventry is an international city, and many communities have links with India, Pakistan, Ireland, and Poland, and many more countries besides. Twinning is about international understanding and friendship, so why not find out more?
I can't go back. There we go. I can't seem to go back to the presentation. James, can you help me with this?
While we're moving on to the next slide, oh, here we go. We'd like to tell you that this project is very much focused on Coventry, and the Coventry story is quite distinctive. It has roots in the war experience, as we've seen, and a tradition of supporting peace and reconciliation. It's also distinctive as twinning has had general support and has not been undermined as a concept as it has in some cities. And then Coventry, as described by many people to whom we spoke, is an international city, and some of the links, for example, the new link with Jalandhar in the Punjab, reflects the communities we have in Coventry.
Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you.
So this is a festival of social science. What does social science tell us about community and place? Many social scientists think about and write a lot about globalization and how the world is getting smaller. Ideas pass across borders much more quickly today, as does people, goods and services. People's sense of space and community is shifting. We are much more flexible in our sense of local and national identity. For those at ease with globalization, twinning presents opportunities for trade and mutual economic benefit. Opportunities too for mutual understanding and solidarity with the past. Twinning, as we have seen with the Polish choir, makes what is local also international. But how do educationalists like ourselves talk about twinning? Some stress the need to teach global citizenship, the idea of understanding and respecting differences between people. Some talk about the contact hypothesis, which is actually an old idea which suggests that prejudice declines on contact. Others are interested in intercultural communication. This has got a focus on language, but also on learning what are appropriate ways to communicate across cultures. So twinning takes on a greater relevance in today's connected world.
Yes, but there are also challenges of twinning, right? Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. First, the reputation of twinning has been undermined in some cities as people become more insular and skeptical about the top-down links that we've discussed earlier. Visits undertaken by city officials were rarely junkets, but it suited some to characterize them in that way. Twin cities need to explain the value of the other links to the people in these cities, right? Second, we have already mentioned how the world has become smaller and how more and more people have the opportunity to travel these days, different to what we learned from Katie, for example. But perhaps cities like Coventry are left with a too Eurocentric list of twin cities. Most of Coventry's twin cities are in Europe, only one in Asia, one in Australasia, and then we have a couple in America. Also, we need to know that nowadays, nearly everywhere is accessible through digital means. So twin cities will have to adapt to enable these online networks to work as well, especially in a year like this one. Next, all cities inevitably will have some links which are dormant or orphaned for various reasons. So the challenge is to accept that those links will fade and other, perhaps less formal ones will take the place. And that's when bottom-up links become powerful because they are based on needs and interests of the people, right? So the next slide, please. Michael?
I would like to signal that we do need some questions. If you can put some questions in the comments box, because we want to leave enough time to ask and answer questions. But I want to finish in this part of the presentation on what is the recurring value of twinning. And we come back to a theme which everyone to whom we spoke used when they were talking about twinning, and that was broadening horizons. To us as education people, this is a powerful message, as education is about not only providing skills and knowledge, but a mindset of curiosity about how others live. As the American educationalist Dewey said, but suppose that each of us becomes aware of what the other is doing and becomes interested in the other's action, and thereby interested in what he is doing himself as connected with the action of the other. The behavior of each would be intelligent and socially intelligent and guided. We have, in the history of twinning, a powerful example of ways in which we can see each other through each other's eyes and realize that we are fundamentally similar but different according to the accident of birth and upbringing. Okay, so what we'd like to do is if you have some questions for us, could you please put them in the comments box, and we will try to provide the best answers we can do. Okay, so we have the first question is, are there some type of projects that you think work best or better than other types? Nicole, do you have any opinions on that?
In terms of twinning, I think this year has been very challenging, and we both know this idea, our collaboration was going to be different at the beginning of the project, and we had to adapt throughout the development of the project, right? So I think that's the key. There are some types of projects that you think that might work, but then you need to be flexible to adapt in case something like what happened this year happens again.
Good. I think also from our investigations that projects need to have some roots in different communities. They need to have this bottom-up element, and where projects such as the Dresden Arts Exchange really show very well is what can happen when people get together off their own initiative. So certainly, I think twinning needs to have that bottom-up involvement if it's going to succeed. And as Nicole said, there are, in Coventry's got an enormous number of twin cities, 26, and it's impossible to say that all of those twin cities are active. I think it's some of them. You need to make the twinning alive through the interests of people on both sides of the arrangement.
We have another question there.
Yeah, what do you think are the main? Cristobal asks, what do you think are the main challenges that twinning will face in the future?
Okay. There's this reputation that twinning has that we need to consider, right? I mentioned as part of one of the challenges, you mentioned the bottom-up group links, right? That are very powerful, but at the same time, we need people who are willing to connect with other people in other cities to make them alive, right? To make these links alive.
Okay, yeah, that's good. But I think also, you know, because twinning, as Nicole said in the presentation, has been under some attack in some countries, in some cities, and populist movements, you know, are decrying the value of twinning. I think in Hartlepool, but please don't quote me on that. It might be might be another city. You know, got rid of all their twin links as they saw, as the populist mayor said, because they were, in inverted commas, a waste of time and money. And I think people interested in twinning have to really sort of keep talking about and stressing the contribution of that twinning makes, and the very modest costs involved. I think it's really, I think in Coventry, and I think in many places, city officials have gone overboard to keep those costs at a minimum, and they are incredibly modest. You know, the budget for Coventry twinning is tiny, and I think, you know, I think that this needs to be sort of reiterated. So I think those are sort of important challenges that we face, is reputational ones, and I think this plays out differently in different countries. I think we've kind of picked up that in some countries twinning is given much greater importance than it is in this country, and we need to understand that and how we can you know, how we can support it.
Yeah. We have another question there. Does technology facilitate or disrupt twinning?
So excellent. I love technology, Kang Yu. So that's brilliant. And I think undoubtedly technology is really crucial to twinning. And you know, as we were saying in the past, twinning was all about physical, well, sort of in-person visits, and I don't think it needs to be that way. You know, it doesn't need to be that way. There's value, you know, physical visits are often more immersive for people and more exciting, but they don't always need to be in person. I think a model that works very well for visits is in a preparation phase, that students, or if we're thinking about school visits, that in a preparation phase, students, and from both from schools here and schools somewhere else, will be in contact with each other using technology. As they come for their visit, there's an in-person visit, but then later followed up by collaborative work at a distance, at a time when they're able to put faces to names. So I think, you know, it's not an either or, and I think there are instances where you can only use technology, and there's probably instances where you'd rather use, where you'd give preference to face in person, but there's a synergy between them, which I think works very well in some cases, in many cases. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. There is value in both ways. I don't think it's a disruptive completely, and of course an in-person visit also will provide you with experiences of, I don't know, flavors and I don't know, touching people, getting together with people, and that cannot be done with the technology. But in the end, these links, even if they are done in person, will go on for many years if people get in touch via technology, you know.
I think on that point, one of the most, it wasn't a Coventry example, it was an example from the island of Ireland, where schools were in contact with each other through technology, as a way of breaking down barriers between students on one side of the border and students on the other side of the border. And in one sense, you could have imagined that physical visits were quite possible, and maybe they took place. But there was something important about working with the technology. In a sense, it bridged not the physical distance, but the psychological distance, the psychic difference between different people, and was a really striking example, the contact hypothesis, that being in contact with people from different communities was a powerful idea against prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
So while we're waiting for next question, so please do ask us another question. Be delighted to hear that. I would like to ask Nicole a question. So Nicole, you are new to Coventry. I've been here a long time, but you are new to Coventry. What strikes you about twinning and Coventry? Was it something that you were aware of before you came here?
Actually, no, I wasn't aware of the links. I wasn't aware of the history behind it. I was aware that there were cities that were twinned with others, but at least in my country, those links do exist, but there is no information about why they were made. The people do not know about that. So when I started working with you in this project, I started discovering all this history behind twinning and how the connections are made, the different types of links and the different types of collaborations that there are with the cities. And yeah, it was fascinating, and I've learned a lot throughout this project.
Excellent. Okay, what strikes you as distinctive about Coventry yourself?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
Yes. What strikes you as distinctive in this special about this history of twinning and Coventry?
Like the origin of twinning is very moving. I mean, it all started with this idea of peace and reconciliation and support and solidarity with other cities who were undergoing the same things that Coventry had gone through. So I think that's what's more distinctive for me.
Okay, excellent, good. Okay, do we have more questions?
I don't think we do.
Okay. I think maybe I could just reflect on one or two things also that that have come up within the project, or maybe just saying a little bit about where I think new research would be interesting would be useful in the future. And I think there's definitely room to look at twinning to look at histories of twinning in different countries and in different cities. So we've all said that Coventry is a very distinctive story, but in other cities have slightly different stories, and in some cases really don't have the same richness and the same tradition as Coventry. I think in the future, we've discussed the challenges of twinning for the future, and I think I've been struck and thought quite a lot about whether you need twinned cities or whether you just say, look, we have this situation where people are increasingly connected with all different parts of the world, and whether we actually need to do that formally, or whether we should just say, oh, here's a connection with Japan, here's a connection with Shanghai, here's a connection with the Punjab, and just go from there. And I don't really know the answer, but I don't think they are opposed to each other. I think you can support twinning and generalized international friendship. I don't think it needs to be one thing or the other. I think it's, from that point of view, I think having a list of twin cities can be very helpful because it provides a focus for exchange. It gives you some reason to mail, to communicate with someone in Dresden or someone in Kiel to say, hello, yes, we're a twin city. How about doing something? So I think that focus that twinning gives is an important one, and it gives a kind of green light to a culture of cooperation. So I definitely think there's value in it. I think it's maybe Coventry got carried away, you know, in terms of its own cities by having so many, and you know, and I think 26 is fairly unmanageable. So I think that's an aspect of it as well. But I think it definitely is worth continuing with officially twinned cities and towns. But I also think that shouldn't be, and I don't think is, at the expense of you know, creating these sort of much looser, much more informal connections with people from different towns, because of some local link, or sometimes the enthusiasm for one person in one community. So you know, I think from that point of view, you know, I'm a great supporter of twinning. I think it's a great, it's a you know, it's a very helpful and productive and thing that cities do, and I support it. I think you know, I think we shouldn't be over romanticize it, because you know, there are challenges, and it does take time and energy. So I think that's a very, very good point as well.
I think there is another question there. What is the role that twinning can play in a context of global threats like COVID and global warming and so on?
It's a very good question. And I would say, you know, it gives an opportunity to share ideas. I know I took part in a meeting which was well above my head, of representatives from twin cities, led by scientists in Italy and Volgograd. But you could see that there was a sort of potential. Obviously, it's not the same potential as huge commercially supported multinationals producing vaccines, etc. But what it was an opportunity on the ground for people to compare their experiences and their ideas about, well, in this case, about health practices. So I think that's, you know, I don't think twinning is going to be the replacement or stand in for these for action that needs to be taken, which require huge resources, and you know, it's not going to happen through twinning. But I think it's an important part in your practices can be shared, and also, as you've got there, global warming as an example is something that people can act together on and collaborate on across sites. Yeah. I'm really sorry that we can't get your views on this as well, but thanks for that question.
Yes, we have a couple of minutes left. Maybe we should share the website of the project, where you can find all the information about what we have done, which was summarized more or less throughout this presentation. There's also an Instagram page where you can see different twin cities with Coventry and the history behind these twinnings. For some of them, you'll find very interesting stories, as you heard in the presentation, but for others, there isn't much information about why those links were made. But you can still find the dates of the links there.
I think we would also like to stress that, you know, all we've done on the project is to gather together different stories, and the work for twinning, you know, has been carried out by different groups and organizations. And as I said earlier, the Coventry Association for International Friendship is the place you want to go to if you want to get involved practically in twinning. There are also international links for twinning, and we give those on the website, where you can find out about world initiatives to do with twinning as well.
Yes, and I would like to add that this project was also part of Coventry Creates, and we worked with an artist, which was the person who created the video that we shared with you. And this was an opportunity to bring research closer to the communities, and that's why we created this art form, this piece of work, right? And I think James probably will tell you later about different presentations that are related to that.
Okay, so I think that's a really good note to finish on. So thank you very much for your patience and your interest in this topic. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for James for inviting us.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you both for a fascinating talk. That was brilliant. I've got a lot of fond memories of going on school trips with twinned cities. So yeah, it's really reminded me actually of sort of that formative period. It's so important. That was fantastic. So yes, as Nicole mentioned, we've got more on Coventry Creates this afternoon. So there's another event on at 5 p.m. You'll find all the details for it on this website. But we're talking to some of the artists who've been involved with Coventry Creates and finding out a bit about how they've worked with some researchers across both Coventry University and the University of Warwick. So do check that out as well. That's another good one. If you've missed any of our events this week, you can catch up on them again at this website. We've got links to all of the previous events, so you can watch them after the event. One in particular occurred to me as you were talking. There's one about global collaboration around global warming, which was really interesting. So we had a fantastic global panel of speakers from lots of different countries around the world, all sort of thinking about how to work together to face challenges such as global climate change. So so that's another, I think, a good example of another event that you might want to catch up on in your own time. But other than that, it just leaves me to say thank you again to Michael and Nicole. Fantastic talk. And yes, thank you for all your questions in the chat. And we will see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.